Zach Laws of Gold Derby here with Jody Lee Lipes. He's the cinematographer of A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And Jody, obviously there's a lot of love and affection out there for Mr. Rogers, as we saw with the documentary "Won't You Be My Neighbor" and all the public showings of affection that have come for this movie. I wonder, when you first signed on, did you feel a certain amount of responsibility in getting this project right?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to me was getting the feeling of the show, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, right, and just getting it accurate and as, honest to what it was as possible. So that was kind of the starting point for me and Mari Heller, the director, creatively, was just how do we make the show feel like it really felt.
Well, just explain that a little bit more. How did you talk a bit about the feel of the original Mr. Rogers show and what you had to do in order to capture that?
Well, the most important thing to us was just watching the show, just spending as much time as possible watching how they made the show by just watching episodes of the show. So I watched the entire 1998 season of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which was the season that our movie was about. And, it was this thing where, like, every time I would watch an episode, I would be surprised by, the way they covered the show or the lit the show, or just these choices that you don't really see when you're a child or even like remember as an adult. You think of it as being a pretty straightforward television show, but it's really not. There's some pretty bold choices. Like the sometimes talk about is, from the episodes I saw, whenever Fred Rogers reads a book on the show, there's a shot of Fred, and then there's a shot of the book from overhead. And in a scene like that, there'll be a shot of him opening the book. And then there's a shot overhead of the book for the entire scene. So it'll be like 5 minutes just holding on a book as he's reading it. So, like, whenever we would kind of get stuck, like, how do we cover this? Like, how would they do this? I would always go back to watching the show and find solutions, surprising solutions by watching the show. And then in terms of, like, technically speaking, I think the most important thing was finding very similar cameras to the cameras that they used to shoot the show at that time, combined with hiring the lighting designer who actually lit the show to light our set.
Oh, wow.
We shot in the exact same studio, in the same room that they shot their show in. And we also hired some of the same camera operators that they used on their show as well. So it was just like a combination of all those things together really helped make it feel very similar to how the actual show felt.
Oh, that's incredible. So I guess you had sort of a bit of a voodoo of the location, as Werner Herzog would say, a voodoo of the camera team. It's funny you mentioned that shot of the book, and it makes me think about something that Fred Rogers always, or people who knew Fred Rogers always talked about, which is his patience, and his ability to just let you like sit in silence for a while on certain things like that. Was that part of your thinking as well? Just sort of like patience? Does that make sense?
Well, I think just generally speaking, my approach, kind of like not even project specific, but just generally speaking, is to kind of do things as simply as possible. So, what's a way we can do this scene with very few or no cuts? Like what's kind of like the least showy, like the least, get the camera in the way of things kind of way of capturing something. So for me, that kind of went right along with that feeling that the show has of like the pacing the show has, and really Fred being very conscious of trying to reduce the number of edits, and being kind of like against flashy, fast, loud children's programming. And I think, the way that we shot the movie, I think just corresponded with that way of doing things. And I think, again, like from watching the show again and again and again, it's like when we're trying to recreate what the show felt like, it just naturally is that way. It's naturally the way that he spoke and the way that he moved and the way that he cut his episodes.
Right. So going off of that, I mean, this is not a biopic about Mr. Rogers. It's got this whole other story about Lloyd Vogel and his friendship. Did that visual style influence how you told his story as well?
Well, I think, as a starting point, it was how do we create the look of the show so it was very similar to what the show actually was. And then the sort of second thing was like, even though Lloyd's story is the majority of the film, like then going backwards into that and saying, like, Lloyd's story takes place in this year, so do we want to kind of exaggerate the time period factor and make it feel dated as a way of kind of drawing us into that time period, or do we want to make it feel like now? And then secondly, like, how does the Lloyd's world, or so the majority of the film, relate visually or go against the Rogers part of the film, meaning like within his episodes, within his TV show. So I think the first thing was, we decided we did want it to feel a little bit dated and a little bit period. And the second thing was we felt like there needed to be a contrast between Lloyd's world and then the TV show. And that the two different worlds, Lloyd's world and the TV show, would kind of like come together throughout the film, climaxing with Lloyd's sort of fever dream where he sort of imagines himself inside of the show. So as Fred Rogers' philosophy and his kind of morality challenges Lloyd and starts to get inside Lloyd's psyche, kind of visual elements of the show start to kind of overlap with Lloyd's world, and he starts to conflate the show and his own life. And so basically we wanted a format for Lloyd's world that wasn't too far away from the TV show, but we wanted something that was distinct. So at first we were talking about like, well, should we be shooting the entire movie with like a very dated video format? And then we ended up deciding, after film was no longer an option for us, we ended up deciding to shoot on the Alexa on Super 16 mode, which is basically like just a really low resolution kind of video. It's like a not modern looking kind of video. So it helped kind of get close to the look of the TV show, but distinct enough that it felt like a different, distinct world.
Okay, interesting. I was wondering how you did that. In terms of like creating some of those like iconic moments from the show, obviously that the movie opens with Mr. Rogers' entrance. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's sort of like we got the lighting designer, we got the camera operators, we got the cameras. And then it was like, for me, shooting those scenes, it was about trying to capture everything in one take with multiple cameras, because on the show, it really felt like, or I think a lot of the time it actually was, cut live. So we were really going for the feeling of this is all happening at the same time. So we're shooting with 3 cameras, sometimes with 2 studio cameras, and we wanted to feel like it was being edited live. So that was kind of the intention, was to like the whole scene had to work as one. We weren't sort of like thinking of it as isolated shots. And that came into play with like eyeline, because, a lot of the time Mr. Rogers would look into the lens. But, when there's multiple cameras, we have to decide when is he looking into camera A, and when is he looking into camera B, and when is he looking into camera C, and make those decisions on set so that Tom knew where to address the audience. So that was really, I was trying to make it feel like a play in a way, like it was all going to happen at once. And even the way that they would cover the show would kind of like dictate that kind of editing, because the shots a lot of the time weren't super distinct, or they would be hard to like do little time jumps or little like tightening editorially, because they were so not distinct from each other. So we kind of deliberately like mirrored that kind of coverage, which meant that editing not in a real live, like real time way would be challenging. So that was kind of always the attempt, is to do it in one.
Mm-hmm. I have to imagine something like that was the pressure is really on to to get that right, because it's something that like every kid in America just about has seen and remembers.
Yeah, and there was even like a bunch of tricks that we didn't know at the time, that Fred and the whole production team did, like that Tom was not aware of. So it's sort of a race for him to like get in the door and change the clothes and change the shoes and sit down, like all while he's singing the song, and like all in time. We found out later like the shoes were pre-laced, or like they would be like 3 sizes too big and things like that, so that it was easier for him to do it quickly. But we didn't know that, and so it was a real struggle for Tom just in terms of like the time to get everything done, but he managed to do it.
Yeah. It was pretty impressive watching it for the first time. I was like, oh, wow, this really was a marathon thing for this guy to do every day. Working with Marielle Heller, I think this is the first time you guys have worked together. Is that right?
Yeah, we did one commercial together years ago, but yeah, this is the first time we've done like a long form narrative project together. Yeah.
What is that collaboration like? I mean, what does she give you as a director that helps you do your job to the best of your abilities?
I think Mari is really gives people a lot of freedom, but she also is very clear about like if she thinks something is wrong, or like if there's something really specific she's trying to get out of something. So it really feels like you're able to work independently, which is a nice feeling, but also that you really have like a real partner who will challenge you at the right time. I think she's kind of the perfect mixture of being, confident enough and like technical enough, that she lets people do their thing. A lot of the time, I feel like people who have less confidence kind of want to control things more, without really having a reason to. The Mari's are like the perfect balance of giving people freedom and getting what she needs to get and doing it the way she wants to do it.
You got an Indie Spirit nomination early in your career for Tiny Furniture by Lena Dunham. What did that recognition mean for you at that time?
Well, at the time, I didn't really know that it's like a deal. I guess I didn't. I was pretty young, and I think I felt a little bit like imposter syndrome or something, because it was like the other movies that were nominated, it was sort of clearly the like low budget option of the bunch, and it was clearly sort of, it felt like to me like it was like, oh, that was really nice that they nominated us, but we didn't really deserve it, was kind of my reaction. But no, I mean, it was great. It helped me, be able to do more movies that I wanted to do, so it was great.
And what are you working on right now? Anything you can tell us about?
I just finished working on an HBO show I was working on for the whole year. That's called I Know This Much Is True, which is a 6-hour miniseries that was directed by Derek Cianfrance, starring Mark Ruffalo.
Okay.
And that was a very technically challenging, long shoot. We shot on film, and it's a twinning story, so it was very, very challenging, and I think it's going to be really exceptional. So I'm excited about that.
Well, hey, maybe we'll be talking to each other again next year about Emmys. So I look forward to seeing that.
That'd be great.
Jody, thanks so much for your time. Congratulations on your work. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
All right, thank you.